Good afternoon. This is the Board Executive Committee of the East Bay Regional Park District Board of Directors. We're meeting on Friday, June 10, 2022, and we're beginning our meeting at 12:33. I will ask our recording secretary, Monique, to take the role of the committee.
This is Monique Salas, recording secretary, taking roll. President Coffey,
Here.
Director Rosario,
Here.
Director Lane. Here. Park District staff participating in this meeting include Deputy General Manager Dr. Ana Alvarez, General Counsel Lynn Borgalt, AGM Christina Kelchner, AGM Allison Cook, Almo Bones, and Suzanne Wilson. Today's meeting is held pursuant to the Brown Act as amended by AB 361. Board members and staff may participate via phone, video conferencing, and/or through a hybrid of in-person and remote attendance. We are providing live audio and video streaming. Members of the public wishing to make a public comment can do so, 1, live via Zoom, 2, by submitting an email, or 3, leaving a voicemail. This information is noted on the agenda. If there are no questions about the meeting procedures, we will begin.
Any questions? We're getting fairly used to this. I wanted to say I appreciate getting the PowerPoints that we got yesterday afternoon. That's always, I know, that's really difficult to do, to have those done and ready to come to us before the meeting. So I very much appreciate that. So the first item of substance on the agenda is the Board Executive Committee 2022 Look Ahead Calendar, which I guess we've looked at it early in the year, and this is an update?
No, Director Coffey, Dr. Ana Alvarez, Deputy General Manager in the state of Sabrina Landre. This is the first time that we're bringing this forward. We did discuss it outside the public setting per se.
Oh, okay.
In general, but this is the first time that we're bringing this item forward.
Oh, the other one we saw then was the full
The
board's
board,
work plan.
Yes.
And now we're looking at just this committee's.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's what was confusing me. So do you want to present or discuss or?
Yes, please, if I may. So the item before you is the look ahead calendar for 2022, and I call it an update because we have already spent half of the year has already gone by. And yes, it can be confusing since it's the first year that we are using or introducing the terminology of a look ahead calendar, which gives an opportunity for the board members to be able to see ahead of the schedule, what's coming in front of you. We do have a look ahead for the year for the entire board of directors meetings, as well as we're incorporating at each of the board committee meetings a look ahead calendar. And so for this board executive committee, the items that you have before you is what remains of these years that require advanced consideration by the board executive committee, which serves in an advisory capacity to the full board of directors in the decision-making process and policy matters, and in accordance with the Park District's board operating guidelines and the California Public Resources Code. As you can see on the agenda staff report, the Board Executive Committee has held 6 meetings, including today, to discuss or take action on about 12 different matters. And so it's quite we've maintained consistency in our meeting schedule, which was not necessarily the case last year. I just want to make that distinction in terms of we want to understand the pace of our work. So the proposed look ahead calendar for the remaining of this year proposes an additional 19 matters related to the planning, either land use plans or land use amendments, on park planning or planning of capital projects, including design. It also brings together an opportunity to discuss community engagement through stakeholder groups like the Park District's Environmental Roundtable and the Park District's Advisory Committee. At the beginning of the year, you saw the Trails Working Group, which is also serves in it's another stakeholder in a very specific focus in terms of how we engage with our community. We are being joined today by some of the representatives of the divisions who, and mostly ASD, so I just want to acknowledge the presence of Christina Kelchner, our AGM of ASD, because the Board Executive Committee does take a big role in ASD as well as in public affairs. And I know that Carol Johnson is joining us remotely, our AGM of Public Affairs. This is their go-to board committee for capital planning and as well as public affairs. So they're here to help us answer any questions that you may have or to engage with us in a conversation about how what you have in front of you, how it was developed and the decisions that were made in terms of timing, what is coming before you before the end of the year and when. So with your concurrence, Director Coffey, I would like to take an opportunity to review each month in the proposed look ahead and give the committee an opportunity to react or ask questions. We would like to ensure that the calendar is inclusive of your interests and priorities, and most importantly, that you have the information that you need on things like the status updates or the status and timing of projects or land use plans, or if you would like to receive an informational report on a specific topic within the scope of the committee, which is outlining the board operating guidelines. Would that be okay?
Good. My notes were mostly not triggered by what's in the list, but thoughts that came to mind of things that aren't in the list. So when we're at the end of this, I can then discuss those topics.
Yes, that would be
See
great.
what you think things in terms of appropriateness for exec as opposed to operations as opposed.
Yes, happy to engage in that discussion. So today we have a full agenda, but let me skip to the month of July. We do have an opportunity to hear from the operations. So I've identified the division that's coming forward and the topic. So the operations division is coming forward to give us an update on the community outreach programs, which is always good to understand all the good work that's being done by operations folks in that regard. And also public affairs will be providing their 22-23 community relations and engagement expansion plan. So July, the theme will be stakeholder engagement. In the month of August, we do have 3 items. One is we're hoping that we can bring continue the conversation from a board workshop on the proposed capital program policy, which you're going to learn all about and hear and understand the framework that will be introduced by our general manager at your next board workshop in this month of June. And I believe it's on June the 16th. 23rd. The 23rd. Thank you, Christina. And so if there's any conversations that will continue to continue considering the adoption of a policy, the conversation will continue here. And we also have ASD coming forward with an amendment to a land use plan for Pleasanton Ridge, as well as the Southern Las Trampas. So here you have 2 specific plans that have been of great interest to the board. And if there's no questions, I can move to the fall, to September, but it's a busy summer.
I have to remember to turn this on. The capital program policy, is that not a topic that we're going to have a workshop on?
Yes.
I think you mentioned, and so it's
Yes.
coming here too?
Yes, because at the board workshops or the board study sessions, we have an opportunity to have discussions, but we don't take any actions. So if there's a need to take action, it will need to be at a board committee level or at the full board. So we're proposing that if there is a need to continue the conversation and take action, such as the adoption of a policy, it will need to be here.
Thank you, Director. And if I could clarify a little bit on June 23rd, there's a goal setting workshop study session with the board. And that will include kind of an introduction of the CIP planning program, capital improvement project planning. And then in July 22nd, there'll be a study session with the board focused solely on the capital improvement planning prioritization. And as Anna says, that won't be to take any action. That's just a study session discussion with the board. Then we do plan to come back to the full board, depending how it goes and how much more discussion the board wants. But our tentative plan is actually to come to the full board in August rather than coming to the board executive committee. And this has been a bit of a moving target. So I think that's been an update that we just had with the general manager yesterday. So that's flexible. There's no rules about how we have to bring this forward to the board. But the plan right now is that that would come to the full board in August for action.
Okay, that makes sense.
Thank you.
So what outlines and describes what comes to the board executive committee is the language from the board operating guidelines. But there's always strategy on how we layer and how we move things forward. And it's within the discretion of the board president and the general manager.
Who is going to be putting together the study session on board goals and priorities?
That's our general manager, Sabrina Landres.
So she's working it. So the conversations I've had with her were appropriate. All right.
Okay. So moving on to the fall, we're hoping that in the month of September to bring here, while there's an interest to perhaps bring it first to the full board, I'm asking that staff consider bringing back, we haven't heard an update on the Parada Oaks North building renovation. This committee has heard that item, but not this year. We also have from our legal division, a review of the board operating guidelines.
Go ahead.
I'm glad we're looking at the board operating guidelines, and I'm sure Dee is too. I have a request with regard to the guidelines that relates to transparency in our minutes. And staff has been recommending we move to action minutes, which I think is a mistake. And I would like us to include in the operating guidelines a sentence or two on what the board expectations are for minutes. You know, so there are minutes of pages. Well, there's transcriptions. There's minutes that the poor clerk has to make enormous notes on and does pages. And then there are minutes which are shorter and have a reflection of the discussion. And then there are action minutes. And I am interested in that second level. And you know, one of the things that's happened with PAC over the years is we've had extensive minutes and then we've had shorter minutes, and and there's been some discussion about it. And when I was at the PAC last time, they were concerned that the board received minutes from the PAC that did reflect their discussions, but didn't necessarily go on forever and ever. And so that is something that I would like to see, something for us to discuss under the board operating guidelines.
Thank you, Director Lane. Lynn is the lead on the project and she's heard your request. Yes, thank you. We've taken notice of your request. Okay, so moving on to item in the month of October, we do have two items from ASD. One is the master plan from Crown Beach, but specifically the McKay Avenue, as well as the proposed trail for the separated mountain bike use in Wildcat Canyon. We also have two items from Executive and Legislative Division. One is the records retention policy, as well as an art policy. And we're having for the first time from the Division of Operations, we're bringing forward the annual civic corp agreements, which is, this serves as an agreement with an agency. And again, following the board operating guidelines, we're asking operations to come here rather than bringing this item to the board operations committee.
This is a transaction with another public agency. Our manual finds that as an issue.
Yes. Mhm.
History of that.
Yeah.
I was just saying I'm interested in the history of how that public agency transactions got shifted to executive rather than operations. I'm fine with it. I was just curious,
Mhm.
you know?
I have an October comment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, my October comment?
Yes.
I really like this. This is very helpful to have. Actually has to do with the Crown Beach plans. I'm not sure whether it's the master plan or the land use plan. But we did, at our last field trip, Brian Holt gave us a little update on what is planned. So is that the master plan?
Yes, that is the master plan. It is our planning process for opening this park. So it's equivalent of a land use plan. In this case, we're calling it a master plan.
Okay,
So it is the same thing that he went over at the field trip with the board at the site visit with the board last Friday, would be the same plan.
okay. So I did have a reaction to that presentation, and I actually talked to Director Wieskamp today a little bit about it too, because she wasn't able to come. And that was the the reduction in parking. Now, I was on a transportation commission where everybody talks about, we need to look into the future. We need to have a vision on this, and everyone's going to use transit. Let's face it. And we'll make them use transit if they don't. And everybody needs to have 2 or 3 people in a car, and everybody better do that. And here's the way we'll enforce that, but with a variety of approaches. And that's what this reminded me of, because we don't have enough parking at that end of Crown Beach anyway. And we are making plans to develop more of the park to the, I don't know what direction it is, north of the visitor center, which I thought were really very nice. And then we are planning to put a bus turnaround there, which will remove parking spaces. And I said, well, where's some additional parking for this additional use? And I got what I characterize as a Transportation Commission answer, or maybe a San Francisco Golden Gate answer. And that is, people will adjust, but you have to shrink it down and then make them adjust. And I'm like, I think you should apply some common sense to this. And I don't think that we should be reducing the number of parking spaces in that end. And so I'm just letting you know that when this comes up, I'm going to talk about this again. And I'd like to have a common sense answer to it,
Thank you, Director Lane.
possible.
Noted. And we will
Okay.
look at that. We'll take a look at the parking there for sure.
Thank you, Director Lane. So it helps to have Christina here, so she's hearing you. And we could certainly have a conversation with you in advance of bringing this item forward. So moving on to the next month, we have, for the month of November, you will see that we do have quite a bit of items here. And the reason for that is that how you see the pace of the calendar is simply based on capacity issues, staffing capacity to be able to deliver on these pieces. So the month of November, we do have from ASD, the Vasco Hills Byron Preserve Management Plan, and 2 items from the Executive and Legislative Division. A proposal for a park advisory charter, which is the continuation of the work that was began by the general manager and Eric Fuller in reimagining how we work and the role of the park advisory committee. And also we will continue the conversations that were first initiated with planning with ASD on the park naming policy. So now this has progressed to the Executive and Legislative Division, and we're hoping to continue the conversation in November with you. And we also have 2 items from the Legal and Division. One speaks to the ordinance to increase board compensation for next calendar year, as well as the findings regarding the need for 10 compensable meetings per month. And the reason why you see those here, which we didn't do last year, is because again, following the guidelines from the board operating guidelines, one of the roles of the board executive committee is to speak and represent the structure of the board, which these two items certainly fall within that scope of work. And then for the month of December, we have two additional items from executive and legislative division. No, one item from the executive and legislative division. We would like to share with you the park advisory goals for the following year in 2023, as well as receive from the parks, from the public affairs, the year-end report on the foundation's contribution to the park district. So we're wrapping up the year. And I'd like to now listen to the things that are not here, because I have also myself a couple of items that I would like to discuss with you to see if we can add them. So I'll turn it over to you, Director Coffey.
All right, so I have a number, but let's go to the committee first. D?
Yeah, I think one thing that's missing is ordinance 38. And I know public safety does a review every other year, but I think there needs to be discussion prior to the, because oftentimes the year it's approved, all we see is the results of that review. And then I think there needs to be some opportunity for the board to have some input to that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And then on the board, the park naming policy, I'd like to, when we discuss this, what's the capacity for park staff to, how many names is there a capacity? Because I know we have a lot of names being have been proposed for different facilities.
Mhm.
And so I just like to have an idea of what that capacity is and what it actually takes, because I know my brain is
It's Friday.
it must be the heat.
Yes.
I keep wanting to say Judge John Sutter, but it is Thurgood Marshall. That was very intense, but it was very welcome and appreciated. So yeah.
So we're going to look at the existing policy. There is one.
Yes.
And see how we might address it, newly informed by our experiences to date in recent years. Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
Any others, Steve?
I think that's it.
Are you done?
Yeah, I think
We can come back.
And I think I talked to one of the staff who retired and did our name policy partway through our Thurgood Marshall discussion. And we were talking also about the Sidon Visitor Center. And he said, so you're naming things after people the way we said you weren't to. You weren't supposed to. And I was like, uh-huh. And so maybe we're not looking at the naming policy as closely as we should as we step through. And then, of course, may need some amendments because we want to do things differently. Okay, then I have two other things. One is, Operation 38. Couple of us had talked to the chief at the last board meeting about the possibility of addressing electric bikes in the parks sooner than later. Usually what we do is every other year. And he said that was a possibility. So I just wanted to mention that.
I think specifically he was supportive of the idea of addressing ordinance 38 and e-bikes. My question is whether the scope of the issue that will be addressed to the PAC, which I think is supposed to be this month. And Jim O'Connor, I believe, is putting together
Over there.
is Jim? Oh, he snuck in. So yeah, you might want, I'm going to put you on the spot, I think, based on this coming up. But I'm wondering if the scope of the assignment we're giving the PAC of follow-up to the trail users working group thoughts and recommendations will include the idea of what are we going to do about e-bikes? Or if that isn't intended in the scope of the topic as you are going to present it to the PAC, I'm kind of wondering where that might fit in. The other issue is that we have with bikes, there are a number of them, is the Brioni's pilot project. Is that going to be also within the scope of what's given to the PAC? Our e-bikes. These are all issues that are really front and center for us as board members. We're confronting them all the time. The e-bike issue, the trail use conflicts or possibilities. We have coming up happily, in my mind, addressing the possible addition of mountain bike flow trails in Wildcat if it's feasible. So there are all of these issues coming together. Are they all going to be directed toward the PAC, or is it going to be more narrow, at least starting off?
Jim O'Connor, Assistant General Manager of Operations. All good questions, Director Coffey. And my intention on the 27th of this month is to primarily focus on the Brioni's pilot project. And we just actually had a lively discussion about that at the Environmental Roundtable. And that project, that program is really about addressing trail crowding, essentially, in our current parks, and strategies around how to do trail management to address conflict, trail user experience, et cetera. So that's a kind of a narrow slice of the issues that face us into the future. I think the PAC is still working through what their focus is in regards to this trail issue. It is probably going to be discussions about trail planning, trails master planning, those types of concepts. The things that will come out of the pilot project, these strategies would be part of that solution. Now, going back to the original question from yourself and Director Lane around e-bikes, my understanding is that e-bikes was going to be tackled as a separate topic sometime this fall with the PAC. And I don't know if Eric's on the line here, but I see he's on the Zoom. But that I think is part of their work plan, but for a separate item, separate discussion later in the fall. So that's my understanding how that's going to be handled. So I am going to address the pilot project on the 27th of this month, and the e-bike item is supposed to be held later on, maybe in the fall. That's my understanding.
Okay, well, just keep us informed of that schedule and where it might happen. Director Lane and I share a concern that, and I make a point of doing some math when I'm out in the parks. A large percentage of bicycle use right now, today, in our parks is e-bike, and a large percentage of those are people my age, senior or older, and they thoroughly enjoy this new mobility they have to actually get up in the higher parts and bicycle around. And the idea that we would be ticketing these folks is beyond my ability to comprehend, and we don't. And I was doing the Ukraine loop and ran into two seniors that live in that area who told me, "Oh, this bike is great. I wouldn't be able to do this if I didn't have this bike." And I just had to smile and just say, "That's great." So
You didn't say to them,
I am going to call the police, get you ticketed. So there's a reality out there that I think Ordinance 38 needs to address, and we need to move that along, since it's ever growing, and it becomes the part of the larger issue that we have with volumes in the parks.
Mhm.
And I know those who say, well, if you let the e-bikes in, it's just, yes, it's going to add to volume. That's true. But that's a general issue that we have and will continue to have in all aspects of trail use. So that's where I'm coming from. So that's just to tee it up for when it can come back to on this list. That would be great.
Okay, well, we'll keep you updated.
Or to Pat, I don't want to preempt.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Welcome.
I have a couple more.
Yeah, go ahead. Keep going.
Then I didn't say that I'm really happy to see Las Trampas on schedule for August. And then the other thing that I really would like us to grapple with at executive committee is how we get regular reports from HR. And I can see, from May on, there's nothing. And we had, well, we're talking about COVID prevention, but, I'd really like to see that the board has the opportunity to have a better understanding of how well things are going or what the challenges are with HR. And there's no other committee of the board that's doing that. And I'm not talking about private information. I'm talking about how is it functioning? Because the way I hear about it is from staff and occasionally from board members and rarely from people who are at HR who are hesitant to talk to a board member about things sometimes. And I think that we need to be addressing HR issues at the executive committee.
Thank you,
Well, I'm
Director.
gonna, let me piggyback on that because Director Lane has now taken two of the items that I had in my list. One was e-bikes and HR, because I've noticed that we don't have a personnel committee. A lot of public agencies do. And I don't want to freak people out by suggesting we have one, but those thoughts have occurred to me on occasion. And the topic that I was thinking of that I would like to see on this committee's agenda at some point is how we're doing with recruitment. That's not necessarily something that is good to discuss in a closed session over, when we're discussing bargaining issues, right? Or labor negotiations. But just the way we are encountering recruitment issues these days, because all of us are reading about them, right, everywhere. So I thought that would be something that we've touched on occasion, but would be a great topic for this committee.
We do have AGM Cook here who, before she answers the question, I just want to identify or bring to your attention that in preparing the 2022 look ahead calendar, and in anticipation of all the work that legal is undertaking to review the board operating guidelines, I have taken the time yet again to review carefully the board operating guidelines. And you're absolutely correct. The board executive committee is the committee that has been identified to address what is called in the document personnel or HR matters. The interesting piece is that we have done a lot of work with the support of the board to restructure and reorganize and bring additional capacity to human resources. And thank you, because now for the first time, human resources is correctly aligned in its function in the organizational structure, just as our beloved park operations and our natural and cultural resources. So we have an AGM of human resources, which is quite a tremendous change. And then needless to say that the board of directors in general has been very busy in these last 2 years dealing with personnel HR matters at the full board, because that's what was necessary because of the circumstances in which we were trying to operate the park system. So all of the COVID benefits, all of the COVID leaves, all of those personnel issues were brought directly to the board of directors because of the urgency and given the timing in how the work was being done. So yes, there's some things that can come here, absolutely. And it's simply based on, again, the timing. And with that brief context, I'd like to give an opportunity to Allison Cook to speak on your interest on this matter.
Good afternoon, members of the board. I appreciate that you're interested in HR, and I am most appreciative of your support of HR. So we are happy to bring items of interest back to the executive committee. Recruitment data is a very good idea. We presented some on recruitment, I believe, in late April. So we're happy to come back and update the board executive committee on recruitment items. Again, HR, a lot of HR functions are confidential personnel, but that doesn't mean we can't operate with transparency, not only with our employees, but with the board. So I'm happy to work with Dr. Alvarez to come up with some ideas in addition to receiving some feedback from you on what you would like to hear from us. We are doing a tremendous amount of work to right size HR and really perfect our procedures and policies. And so I think that's another item you may be interested in.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So I'm happy to come back. That's a longer process because we do work with our labor partners on noticing them and collaborating with them on many of our policies. So I can certainly bring forward what the park district's proposals are with respect to policies, but I would just have to caution that there may be some revisions as we work with our unions on those items.
Okay, good. Just wanted to air that.
Would that include the review of the personnel, no, what's that called? The administrative
PAM.
manual, PAM?
Yes, we are looking at that because there are several provisions in the PAM that are actually separate policies. One example is anti-harassment and discrimination, which is important enough that it needs to be a separate policy, but it also needs to be updated because there have been some revisions to FEHA, which is the California law on harassment and discrimination. So that is priority number 2. The first priority policy is an accommodation policy for our disabled employees on temporary modified or light duty work. So we plan on noticing our unions on that first, followed by HR 18, followed by approximately 7 other policies that I've been working with staff on updating.
I think it's a good idea to provide a vehicle for some of these discussions, because otherwise it'll come from you folks to us. And we'll have, disjointed discussions amongst us, or it'll come from the union, because the union obviously is free to talk to us about their issues. That whole right sizing of HR that got, was it 2 years ago, got the finance committee involved in right sizing HR
Yes.
with some controversy attached to that, but that was generated from the union, and it was a good thing because it really did ultimately result in the finance committee looking at this and impacting the budget. So it comes at us from a lot of different directions currently. So if we can have just very distinct policy level issues that you may want to even test, see what's out there from our point of view.
Absolutely, I'm happy to do that.
Anyway,
Thank you for
that
being
was-
interested.
That was the thought. Back to you. That was your list. You
what I
took,
had.
so you took 2 of mine.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It's neat that
It's
we're
good.
thinking alike. The other on my list, let me make sure. Carol Johnson and I and Juliana and I have had discussions that I've also had with the general manager concerning the restructuring of the foundation leadership
Mhm.
and the park districts. So I think this is, it's guide me if I'm wrong, but I think this is a discussion within the organization, and it has been shared with the foundation board. So I'm hoping I'm not out of line by bringing this up, but I think in terms of restructuring how the foundation is managed in terms of its own executive director, rather than, a shared responsibility with our public affairs director, there are other issues that come into play that we have heard from, in particular, foundation board members. So I had this discussion with the general manager, and it entails looking at the foundation bylaws and that MOU we have with the foundation that in turn together describe and structure the relationship between the park district as a public agency and the foundation as a private nonprofit 501c3 that serves the park district. I'm assuming its 501c3 status is based on being what the IRS calls a support organization of a public agency. It's an easier 501c3 status to gain as opposed to a charitable status. In any event, I've looked at the bylaws and looked at the MOU and have some just fundamental questions about how these came into being as they are. And while we're looking at the actual management and leadership of the foundation, we might want to take a look at some of these provisions in the bylaws. My own experience in my career was creating hospital foundations, and their ties with the public agency that owned and operated the hospital were very different. They all go through their own character and personalities and mission and end up having very different relationships. So there is this foundation under its bylaws, setting aside the MOU, is very independent of the park district, in my experience. The MOU brings the relationship a little more strongly tied. And it was tied through the general manager's office, through, then in turn, public affairs, right? And so I think this is a long way to getting around to it being a topic that I think is ripe for the executive committee. And, maybe see, what the history was, why we have this separate MOU as opposed to having all these provisions in the foundation's bylaws. Why the park district is not the sole corporate member of this nonprofit. There are ties that I personally think ought to exist between this park district as a public agency and the nonprofit affiliate that we have. I'd like to see some stronger ties while giving it independent management. You see, in terms of that kind of management of or balance of issues of park district. I don't want to use the word control. We're not a controlling entity. Some are. Some have subsidiary nonprofits that are basically them. The same boards, the same staff. So this is a fairly independent nonprofit affiliated with this public agency. And I think without having any need to revamp all of that, just to understand what's there and whether there are some things that could be tweaked there. I'd like to see the park district as a sole corporate member, which is what to me creates a parent subsidiary type relationship in the public and nonprofit sphere. We don't, in nonprofit parlance, we don't use the word subsidiary, we use the word affiliate. But we all understand that there are parent corporations and there are subsidiary corporations and varying degrees of control. So I don't know, I'd like to bring a little of my experience to this because it seems like this would be the opportunity to address that. Again, I've had this conversation with Carol and with Juliana and with the general manager, and I think it's a subject of timing of when the general manager and perhaps council have done their own evaluations of this relationship. It's new to both of them, of course.
Mhm.
So I think as whatever is they're comfortable with, council and the general manager in doing this evaluation on their own, it at some point should come back to us. Director Lane?
Well, that all sounds very legal.
Yes.
So what we're talking about is a change in practices with regard to our foundation and public affairs. And my concern is, it's twofold. One is that we continue to have a good communication between public affairs and the foundation. I mean, there were some really seamless things that Rosemary and that I saw Rosemary and Carol do. And I don't think it can be seamless if we're going to divide it differently, but I would like to see really good communication going back and forth. And then the second thing is that if we are going to continue to have the foundation be able to receive funds when we have campaigns, we've got to be sure it's legally separate. And we have been legal in each of the times we've done that. But when we think about any legal changes, we need to keep that distinction because it's been very important to us. So, you all will be grappling with this. I won't, but we've moved to a point where we've got a really, really strong foundation membership, which is a little different than what it was maybe 20 years ago.
You're talking about the board.
The board itself.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sorry, not just membership, the board. And so I think it's really important to have that strong board. Then we'll have the strong board and a strong park district. And we'll have that good relationship, even though we don't have the same person as directing each. And I think it's time, I certainly agree. It's time to divide it because the board has started to be dealing with so many major things that we've asked our public affairs person to have two jobs, and clearly it wears a person out. So, and I think the legal things are always good, but for me, it's you need to set up the legal foundation so that it stays out of the way.
But Director Coven.
If that makes sense.
Yes. Yes, and Director Lane, we hear the request that when the timing is appropriate and that you would like to understand and have an item that comes forward that speaks to this piece. And I'm just being very careful, and we have district council next to me, and I appreciate Lynn and Carol Johnson have been very patient listening. We don't want to discuss this business because we're looking at the schedule on the calendar. So we don't want to dive too deeply into the topics. I'm sure that Carol has a lot that she would like to say, but the best thing that I can tell you is that we listened, that this is an item and that you would like to bring back to the board executive committee. And I will tell you that this will be the appropriate committee. It doesn't mean that it has to automatically come here. It can also go directly to the board of directors, but we heard your request. You would like to hear it here first. Carol, is there anything else you would like to add?
Only that our board from the Regional Parks Foundation will be so delighted to hear that this topic may be coming before the executive committee and or the full board in the future. So thank you for bringing it up here today.
Dee, anything to add?
I just wanted to add, when we do for discussion, when it gets brought before this committee and or the board, that we have examples of the different types of relationships and like there's California State Park Foundation, there's National Parks Foundation, there's lots of big foundations, and how they differ and how similar they are. So that would be very helpful for someone who doesn't understand law that much.
Yeah, and and some of these relationships go sideways and it hits the fan. So I don't want to see that happen with our foundation.
There are foundations that are so independent that they're capable of getting political and go rogue. And there are other foundations that are so controlled by the agency that it raises the issue you have. It's just an alter ego. And that becomes problematic. So there are ways to keep all those things balanced in whatever fits the personality of the organizations, which we'll have here. Anyway, we just teed that up.
Okay, thank you.
I understand there's a work being done. I think that does it for me. It does do my list. And do we need to finish up on the look forward information? Or
This is just an informational item, but I
Okay.
also do want to bring to your attention, I'm listening to you, Director Coffey, this year and understanding the roles as they were intended to be, the role of the board per the board operating guidelines in planning agendas and being more engaged in what comes forward
Mhm.
through a look ahead calendar. I was able to identify 2 more items and I wanted to bring them to your attention.
Great.
One is for, we have an opportunity, if there's an interest by the executive committee, to review the process for the election of the 2023 board officers as an informational item to state the duties and responsibilities in a public meeting in advance of the board action that typically takes place the first meeting in the first meeting in the month of December. So typically we have the board president announcing the nominating committee. The nominating committee meets and then there's a presentation of a slate for officers in which the board takes action on the second or first meeting of December. So prior to doing all of that, I thought there would be an opportunity to discuss how we do that and why we do it that way. And it gives an opportunity for to review the duties of each of the officers. Then the next item is in the month of December, we can also bring forward the proposed 2023 board calendar. And what that is the scheduled meetings of the board of directors and the board committee meetings ahead of the January 2023. And I think staff will be delighted to know that we can do that in advance. So we can bring a proposal to this committee in the month of December. We can't do the appointments of the board president to each of the committees because we're having an election year this year. So that will have to take place during the holiday season and to be ready for the first meeting in January. But we can certainly bring forward the calendar.
That's a good idea.
Yes, Christina? Do you have another, Clayton Ranch? Are you gonna bring?
Thank you. I do have one more item, Christina Kelcher, AGM of ASD. The Jewel Lake item will be coming forward, looking for the preferred concept for restoration of that area around Jewel Lake. So that was supposed to be on the list, inadvertently got left off.
You can bring that here.
Correct.
Well, I was thinking as opposed to the full board, because we've all had now, I don't know how many of the study sessions I've attended, public study sessions and all. I just feel like maybe it's right. What do you all want to see come here first?
I'm
Opposed to
going to
going-
ask Chief Gorgian, who's on the call here. She might have some thoughts about that.
I'll just defer to management on
Okay.
what you're going to bring.
Okay, we're
here.
continuing to narrow down the options. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Hey, Christina, for what month was that? I'm sorry.
September or October?
And while you're on the mic, how about the land use plan for Clinton Ranch?
So we do have a plan for opening access to Clayton Ranch in advance of doing a full land use plan for that. The preserve management plan for Black Diamond Mines, which is immediately adjacent, of course, to Clayton Ranch. That's the preserve management plan that is required under the HCP because they are HCP lands. We do hope to bring that forward and have that kind of take place of the land use planning process. So it's a more streamlined way to open public access.
And when do you anticipate doing that?
It might be before the end of the year, but I can't commit because it requires us to do some partnerships with city partners to get that access.
Very
you.
helpful, thank you.
Please.
I did have a question about doing board calendar that early because, to really do the whole calendar, you need to have board members on the various committees. And then each committee seems to need to evolve to have its times that are convenient for the committee members. And, that's doing things really, really early. I know doing them too late is a bad idea too, but I think it might be kind of hard to do a really complete calendar without a lot of amendments in early December
Yes, it will.
or
thank
even
you.
December.
Thank you, Director Lane. I think that what we were thinking of doing is start with the board meetings. Because we won't even know the appointments, to your point, of which board members will be in each of the board committee.
In terms of this work plan that you've just given to the executive committee, are you doing similar work plans for with the other committees of the board? I think you mentioned that to me.
Yes, yes, I did. Actually, I would say, and I don't want to embarrass him, but Jim O'Connor, AGM O'Connor is the first one that brought forward, it referred to it as a work plan for the Board Operations Committee. And the Board Operations Committee has had that in place for quite a bit of years. And I know that Christina, in this year, she has one for the Natural and Cultural Resources. There's also one with Deborah Acker with the Board Finance Committee. And so this is the first one for the Board Executive, no, the second year for the Board Executive Committee.
Well, this is great. Having served 13 years on the PAC, I was very aware of the fact that they have a work plan that they go over as a group at the end of each year and at the beginning of each year. And it just occurred to me, why shouldn't the full board have that? Shouldn't our committees have that? And so this is the fruition of that discussion that we had at the beginning of the year, that the board really should be a little more engaged in looking down the road at what its agendas will look like. And so this is that vehicle. Okay, let's move on to the next topic, but I'll ask for public comment. Have we received any requests for public comment, Lenny, on any of these topics?
Director Coffey, we have not received any public comments or requests to speak on this item. However, I see there's a member of the public. If there's anyone wishing to make a public comment on this item at this time, please raise your hand.
Okay, so we're all looking at Kelly, right?
Yes.
All right. I don't think we have our reliable public is here, but I don't think we have any other members. So let's move on to the COVID-19 program update, and that is Allison.
Yes, Director Coffey, we have a presentation a joint presentation with Legal and Risk and Human Resources,
All right.
introduced by Allison.
Again, thank you for getting us the preview of the PowerPoint.
Good afternoon again, Allison Cook, Assistant General Manager of Human Resources. Alma Balmas, the Health and Safety Risk Manager, are here to present on COVID. Janelle was supposed to be here also, but she is out ill. So Alma has graciously agreed. Oh, thank you. Alma has graciously agreed to manage the presentation. So I'm going to hand it over to her.
Thank you, Allison. Good afternoon, members of the board. Alma Balmas, the Risk and Safety Manager under the Legal Division. I am going to share the presentation. Let me do this first. Okay, so this is just a very brief update for where we stand regarding COVID-19. We've had a lot of activity, especially during December and January related to the Omicron surge, and we've since implemented different processes to align ourselves with CDPH guidelines. And that has really changed our operations and being able to work safely So just some background on this, the COVID Prevention Program, or the CPP, is really the guiding document for employees to follow so that we're able to continue to work safely at the Park District, as well as members of the public and contractors that we work closely with are also to follow the CPP protocols. Within the CPP, there's provisions about physical distancing, face coverings, which is shifted and I'll get to a little later in the presentation, exposure investigations when we have someone who's had a close contact exposure, which is a very specific definition, or positive cases, isolation and quarantine requirements, cleaning and disinfecting, and vehicle sharing. So just some background, in November 2020, Cal OSHA adopted a new regulation to establish a CPP for all workplaces in California. The Park District established the first CPP in January 2021. And since then, we've revised it in March earlier this year to align with CDPH, local health officials, and Cal OSHA. And it was really the first time all of the state and the local agencies aligned for their exposure guidelines, which was a huge benefit to us because before then it was really hard to provide consistent guidance to our employees. Currently, the CPP is in review. Cal OSHA revised their COVID-19 emergency temporary standards in May. And so the Park District is revisiting that again to further align with what Cal OSHA has implemented, which is basically updating exposure protocols that further align with CDPH. So currently for exposure protocols, we do an assessment when we're contacted by employees who've had a close contact exposure or have been confirmed positive. So close contact is really a specific definition. We're talking about within 6 feet for a cumulative of 15 minutes or more, regardless of face coverings, within a 24-hour period during an infectious period. So once the employee contacts us, we have a team of trained employees who walk them through that exposure assessment to determine whether there was an exposure or risk involved to other employees that they may have worked with during the infectious period. We track that employee. Since we're able to align with CDPH, we don't have to exclude employees who don't have symptoms, who have been either vaccinated, completed a primary series, or boosted. And if they are symptomatic, then they're required to exclude. So we provide all that guidance to make sure that there isn't an exposure at work. Current COVID-19 protocols, just to recap, outdoors, there are no face coverings required regardless of physical distancing. If you are someone who has had a close contact exposure, but we're not required to exclude, you do have some additional guidance where you must physical distance from others, even outdoors, to avoid that close contact exposure. Indoors, face coverings are still required at all times with limited exceptions like actively eating or drinking. And physical distancing is still required, which is 6 feet or more from others indoors. Additionally, we mentioned the CPP has a provision about vehicle sharing. And we just want to remind employees, especially who vehicle share, if it's necessary, to use a KN95 or N95 mask and make sure that the air is circulating as much as possible. As you know, Alameda County has re-implemented the indoor face covering requirement for most indoor settings, and that was effective last Friday, June 3rd. And thankfully, it's no change to Park District operations and protocols because we remained more stringent than the law when we could have peeled that back. And so the indoor face covering requirement still stands for employees and members of the public.
So are cars indoors?
Yes, so vehicle sharing is a specific provision within the CPP. And if you're sharing a vehicle, employees are to wear KN95s or N95s to provide a greater level of protection because you're unable to physically distance. So we do encourage that you also maximize the air, whether that's turning it on and not recirculating it or opening windows. Allison, did you have anything? Okay. Staffing impacts, this is just a visual of staffing impacts. And you'll see in January, which is to the left of the chart, this really highlights just operations staff and public safety. The reason why we are focusing on these two divisions is because they do provide the majority of our critical operations. When we are dealing with the Omicron surge, staffing was a challenge in being able to see which locations might be impacted in that regard. You'll see as time continued into February and March, that impact dropped off. And so it is consistent with community trends. When we had the latest surge related to the BA2 variant, you're seeing the uptick now towards May, and currently we're still going through that, but it's not to the level that we experienced during Omicron. We have been able to safely keep employees working as we're following the CDPH guidelines and allowing those with exposures to continue to work safely because they don't have symptoms. And that does include a testing requirement after a certain time frame. So that way we know what their status is. And if they test positive, then they follow that different guidance. But, you know, this is a good benchmark for the district in terms of if this continues to escalate and we start seeing the numbers reflect what we saw in January, that we'll need to revisit with ops or public safety to see how we can address any staffing impacts. So just to wrap up the COVID-19 update, the key points are that the Park District also has a vaccination policy. As you're aware, the vaccination rate for the district is 98%, which is very high and a really good rate. There's 0 workplace transmissions since July 2020, which is something that we're also really proud of in terms of keeping employees safe. And again, the CPP is currently in review and we'll work closely with HR to introduce those proposed changes to the union and work with our labor partners to implement. Any questions? Or Allison, do you have anything to add?
Just real quick, the last 2 years have been very trying on human resources and risk. And I just want to thank Alma, Janelle, Monica, Dr. Alvarez, Pete DeQuincy, Ruby Tumbler, and all the AGMs for their flexibility, because this has been very difficult for us to manage. We all had to become health experts, even though that's not in our background. So I just felt it really important to call out all the great work that this team has done to make sure that we don't have workplace transmissions, and to not have any since June, July of 2020. That is a huge accomplishment, and the credit goes to every single employee at the Park District.
Thank you, Allison. And if I may, including the board members, because Director Rosario, for example, participated in the labor task force for COVID-19, where a lot of these policies and practices were put into place first, and certainly the board members at large in instituting all the leaves and all the protocols. So it's been quite an ordeal. It's very impressive that we haven't had any workplace transmission since 2020. So thank you, Allison and Alma, for the presentation.
Are we providing test kits, take-home test kits to employees?
Thanks, President. I'm live already, thank you. Thanks, President Coffey. We are providing test kits to employees that have a workplace exposure. So if there's an employee who's positive, who has identified another employee as a close contact, we are providing those test kits to those employees, because we do want to own the fact that they were at work and something has occurred where they might have had an exposure. And so we do have a limited cache that we've been able to secure through our county partners at EMS. And so we also are making sure that we have that reserved in case there is a situation where there's an outbreak by definition, which is 3 or more employees at a work site, to be able to provide kits to the masses. So we do have that on hand and are using it very conservatively.
It just struck me as a matter of convenience for
Yes.
employees.
Yeah, and I will say we are doing test observation. That's one thing Cal OSHA has pivoted to in March when we revised our CPP last, is that we're able to accept observed at-home kits. So if someone is not well enough to get a PCR test done, or if, just convenience and ease of being able to confirm a positive case, that we've been able to set that up remotely and observe tests so that way people can either get back to work and continue as usual, or we guide them through the different route of a positive case.
All right, sounds good. Anything else?
Thank you.
All right, I'll once more look around. Yeah, it is something to applaud. I'll look around the Zoom room and our room for any requests for public comment. All right, seeing none. Our next topic is Bay Area Ridge Trail, Garand to Niles Canyon update. I recall getting an update not too long ago. Was that with another committee that I was listening to? I don't know.
Probably.
Director Coffey and members of the board, Christina Kelchner, AGM of ASD, and we have Suzanne Wilson here, our senior trails planner, who's going to give a presentation on this item. And Suzanne, if you want to go ahead and work on pulling up your slides, I'll just give a brief introduction. This is the trail project that will go eventually from Vallejo Mills Park in Fremont up through the Louis property into Gelderman and Garand. So it's a project we've been working on for a very long time, and we've been negotiating for 5 years with the CPUC staff, the county, and the Pacific Locomotive Association, which runs the railroad in Niles Canyon, for a crossing to get over the railroad tracks for our trail. So we are finally moving this project forward and have reached agreement with the parties. So we're happy to give you this update today, and I will hand it over to Suzanne.
Thanks, Christina. Good afternoon, committee members, staff, members of the public. Suzanne Wilson, Senior Planner in the Trails Program in the Planning, GIS, and Trails Department. And as Christina said, I'm here today to provide a project update for the development of the Bay Area Ridge Trail as it connects Garand Regional Park to Niles Canyon. I'm going to give a quick background just to make sure we're all on the same page. And then we'll move into the details of what we've been working on as of late. So this is identified on the master plan map, showing here connecting land bank property in Garand down to the corner of Niles Canyon and Mission Boulevard at Vallejo Mill Historic Park, which is owned and operated by the city of Fremont. And upon opening, it will open a continuous stretch of actually over 50 miles of Ridge Trail, which I believe is going to be the second longest continuous stretch from Niles Canyon to Kennedy Grove up in El Esperante. The Park District secured the recreational trail easement shown on this map on the right in green in 2014 via settlement. We also secured emergency vehicle maintenance access easement over the existing road shown in brown here. And the two coincide for the northernmost 1.1 mile as it approaches our land bank property. And so the construction scope of that portion of the trail consists of building approximately 3.9 miles of narrow natural surface trail built and designed to multi-use standard. And as you can see, it includes all the dressings of a trail project here. We've got bridges and drainage crossings, retaining walls, etc. Something that makes it a little more unique for this type of a project is that, as Christina mentioned, we do have the crossing of the Niles Canyon Railway, which separates our easement to the north and Vallejo Mills Park to the south. The project came before the board in 2018, November 2018. The board adopted the mitigated negative declaration and officially approved the project. Since that time, we've been finalizing the design of those drainages and the preliminary design of the railroad crossing. We've also submitted permit applications to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and have been going through the negotiation processes with those agencies. And we've also been spending a lot of time and energy working on refining our design and bringing stakeholders to the table and to consensus for an at-grade crossing of the Niles Canyon Railway, which is primarily what the remainder of the presentation is going to focus on. You'll recall that the three main stakeholders for the Niles Canyon Railway is the Alameda County, who owns the railway, Pacific Locomotive Association, or PLA, who leases and operates the rail, and the California Public Utilities Commission, who regulates all rail in California and approves any new or modified railway crossings. This is, a rail that the PLA runs as a historic rolling museum showcasing train operations from about 1910 to the 1960s, using both steam and diesel trains. They operate most Sundays between March and November, with the occasional special event in between. And they're fairly well known for their holiday train of lights, which runs about 4 nights a week between Thanksgiving and the end of the year. So in total, they run anywhere between 85 to 110 days per year. And that's pre-COVID. Their schedules have obviously been adjusted, but I think they've been accommodating many members of the public in this last year. But typically they've served over 50,000 riders annually in the past. Given the historic nature and the geometry of the tracks, the trains are not allowed to exceed 30 miles per hour. However, at the location of the crossing, which is shown in this map here on the left, they've confirmed they only really run there at about 10 to 15 miles per hour. Just over this bridge and off the map is the Niles Depot. So they're either coming into the Niles Depot or heading out of it to Sunol. So their pace is fairly slow. Many years ago, I guess probably about 6 or 7, the CPUC asked the Park District to conduct a crossing alternatives analysis, which we did in 2015. We looked at overcrossings and undercrossings in a few different locations and an at-grade crossing. There were a lot of concerns with the overcrossing and undercrossing, potential visual and cultural resource impacts. Vallejo Mills is a historically significant park, and there are cultural resources in that area that excavation could cause a lot of impact to. There's also a lot of public safety concerns, in particular with an undercrossing. Both these options create larger impacts to the operation of the Niles Canyon Railway while they're being constructed, and they both require additional right-of-way. So the Park District has pursued the at-grade crossing, and given the location of the crossing, we do achieve the appropriate sight distance for an at-grade crossing. Given the nature of the infrequency and the pace of the trains, and the fact that this is a trail crossing with no vehicles being able to use this crossing, this seemed very appropriate. We received a lot of pushback, in particular from the PLA, who operates the rail. There was some liability concerns and maintenance concerns that they raised. At this point, I think we've reached success in garnering support for an at-grade crossing from all the stakeholders. No longer are we discussing if this is going to be a separated grade or at-grade crossing. The discussion shifted to, is this going to be a passive crossing or an active crossing? So passive meaning that there's no flashers, bells, automatic gates, which is what the Park District initially pursued, given again that we meet sight distances and the infrequent timing of the trains and speeds. There's no electrical at this site, so this was a big concern for us, because doing any trenching and pulling electrical through Vallejo Mill would obviously cause the impacts we were trying to avoid with the separated grade crossing. It also, of course, increased the cost of construction and our annual maintenance costs. But we have, through many, seems like years of negotiations, at this point now with CPUC. CPUC is really pushing for a signalized crossing at this location. Their primary reason being that, as you can see here, there are 2 tracks at the crossing location right here. The trains use the north track as their main track, and the Niles Depot is just off the map here. The southern track, the Y track, they use primarily as a siding to switch locomotives to the front and back of the train in order to have extra power to pull the train uphill to Sunol. So it's not frequently used. In fact, at the moment, it doesn't connect back to the main track off the map here. It only connects right here. We did discuss with the PLA the potential to put in an operational agreement, and they were amenable to that. But CPUC gave us feedback when we presented them with a draft operational agreement that really they would support the project through the application process with a signalized crossing. And that message has been delivered at this point pretty loud and clear. And we feel like we've got a success with the at-grade crossing, that has been a win for us, and that this is probably the best path to move forward with all parties being able to come to consensus with an at-grade signalized crossing. So what that looks like for us is really our crossing doesn't change a lot. We still have manual swing gates, the installation of panels at the crossing. So this is kind of looking down this view, this design view at the crossing. So these are our manual swing gates. We'll install panels to cross, there's striping and signage, but we've added just a single flasher on each side. So no automatic gates, just this flasher, this standard 8 active warning device will be added to each side. And after much investigation on getting electrical to the site, we think we can do that by pulling electrical from a box to the north, about 620 feet to the north, through the Caltrans right-of-way, hoping that that will be least impactful since it's a pre-disturbed corridor to the site. We did investigate the potential to use solar, which some signals or flashing signals do use. But ultimately, there was concerns around some of the foot traffic in this area and the proximity to Mission Boulevard and Niles Canyon, that it could be a high spot for vandalism or theft, rendering the signal unreliable. So right now, this is the plan we are going to present in our final application. Will be to include the single active warning device on each side of the crossing and pull the electrical from the north through the Caltrans right-of-way. This will increase the cost of construction, and I'll get into that in a little bit, and it will increase the cost of annual maintenance. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So the CPUC also has a policy not to increase or to maintain the current number of existing at-grade crossings in the inventory in California, meaning that any applicant who's proposing a new at-grade crossing has to identify and remove at least one at-grade crossing. We made an effort to work with agencies that do have jurisdiction over crossings, but given the nature of the lands we own, we don't have jurisdiction over crossings and cannot just choose one to close. The CPUC did understand that predicament and instead asked us to make improvements to an existing at-grade crossing on the Niles Canyon Railway. After looking at some of the crossings, we identified some opportunities where Niles Canyon Railway crosses Kilcare Road. This is Kilcare here. This is Main Street in Sunol. This is Foothill over here, and it crosses our future Tyler staging area is out of the picture over here. And this is the crossing we're looking at. What you'll see here is there's a crosswalk on this side and there's a crosswalk here, but they're somewhat disconnected to get pedestrians and bicyclists safely through this crossing and intersection. We are proposing to update striping and signage to current standards here, and to install a berm, concrete or pavement here, berm to force vehicles to stay in their lane and get around this turn. Right now, they often cut through here, putting pedestrians and bicyclists in danger right here. We're also going to clearly delineate a pathway to the crosswalk on both sides, and remove a few bollards that are currently in the way for cyclists at this location. So we think this is, pretty acceptable suggestion in lieu of removing an existing crossing, since that's something we really can't do. We did meet on site with the county, who currently maintains the roadway here, and with the CPUC, and both were in favor of the plans. So the Park District will have to include this in our budget. This is mitigation for the new crossing. at the other end of Niles Canyon. And we will be responsible for making sure that this gets through CPUC approval process and constructed prior to constructing our at-grade crossing for the Ridge Trail. But then the county will continue to maintain this. So let's talk about what all of that is going to cost. Currently, the board's appropriated measured WW funds in the amount of $700,000, and we received a Coastal Conservancy grant for $200,000 for the project budget. We've spent or encumbered a little over about $255,613 to cover the costs of CEQA, design up to this point, and permitting, leaving us with $644,387. The costs below are the design and construction costs, at this point, estimates for the signalized at-grade crossing and the improvements at Kilcare. It looks like they are going to be together roughly $1 million. And then we still have to construct the 3.9 miles of trail between Garand and the crossing itself. So as of right now, moving forward with the at-grade crossing does mean that we will need to identify additional funds. We will need to work with finance to identify those funds, or potentially go to the other stakeholders and see if there's some partnerships available to do that. We also, taking on the signalized crossing also means that we will have an increased annual maintenance fund. The crossings need to be inspected each year and maintained, and our consultant has suggested setting aside between $10,000 and $15,000 a year to do that. That's obviously not within the Park District's wheelhouse. Maintaining railroad crossings is not something that we typically do, so it's likely something that we would have to contract out to a private organization or work with the county to accomplish. So as for next steps, for starters, you'll see this actually in your board packet on June 21st. There'll be a contract amendment with CSW SD2, who is our design and engineering firm, to complete the design for the signalized crossing and the CPUC application and crossing improvements. It also will include construction support once they've completed the bid documents. In the meantime, we will finalize the regulatory permit agreements, hopefully by the end of the year. And once we do that, we can actually begin to construct the trail between Vallejo Mills North up to Garand. We'll also be submitting the application with our final design this fall to the CPUC. And once that is approved, that looks like it's about a 12 to 18 month approval process. And that's actually a smooth process without protests, which I think we can say with the addition of the signalized crossing will be our situation. So once that's approved, like I mentioned earlier, we'll have to construct Kilcare improvements first, and then we'll be able to construct the at-grade crossing for the Ridge Trail. So it's likely that the trail itself won't be open until 2024. But the construction of almost 4 miles of trail between the crossing and Garand will definitely keep us busy, give us plenty to do in the meantime. So we're kind of moving on, keeping about 2 or 3 different tracks going here on this project. And something that's actually not on here is we'll also be needing to work with the city of Fremont to acquire a license for the trail in the short bit of trail in Vallejo Mill Historic Park. And of course, identifying funding for the other items of the project. That concludes my update on the presentation. You can actually see that this photo I'm realizing is actually my background photo right now. This is actually on the alignment of the recreational trail, looking eastwards towards Sunol, but in Niles. Can I answer any questions? I'll stop sharing here.
Director Rosario has a question.
Yeah, great presentation. Thank you, Suzanne. On the construction of the trail, have we determined 4 foot or 6 foot for multi-use?
Well, I don't think we've pin down a specific number of what it will look like in the end, but this will be built with trail equipment. So, our Suico 480 has a 5-foot blade. We also will be acquiring, I think our trails department is going to be purchasing a Sutter 300, which has a smaller blade. But either way, you have to maintain, be able to cut a wide enough trail to be able to hold the piece of equipment itself. So likely it will be somewhere, its original cut will be probably close to 6, and then that'll probably fill in a bit till 4.
Great.
Good.
And this is just a comment, it's amazing. I was having lunch in Jack London Square, and the trains there are coming through an urban area, and it's amazing. We have to do the same level of signal crossing for a train that runs a third of the year, 110 days, and it runs at 15 to 20 miles an hour. That seems excessive.
Yeah, I think we would agree with that. I think there was some, perfect storm here with the timing of a couple of rail accidents that had happened with pedestrian and trains in the county. So the county is, aware of that and wants to make sure that things are, very, very safe, given what they're dealing with from other locations, despite the fact that this is a very different crossing in nature.
Yeah, and then hopefully when this all gets built, and then I was thinking of the maintenance, we can maybe cross-train an electrician or somebody from Mass to contract out and train somebody, and then we could probably take it over. Something to think about. That would cost a lot less than contracting out. But because we do the same for the water operation at Lake Belvedere, and then our electricians do all the pumps in the park district. So I think it's something that's totally doable. But yeah, let's move this forward. Difficult process, but like to see it done. Thank you very much.
Director Lane?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, sometimes we just have to do something like this, and there we are. So could you tell me how exactly the crossing would work for a person coming on the trail? So they'll come down the trail when it's all completed, and they'll get to the track. And so do they press a button? How does this work?
So that's a great question. So as you come down the track, if there's no train coming, there will be manual gates that you just open, and they open away from the track, so that if a train starts coming while you're crossing, you can just push right out the other side. If there is a train coming, then it will trigger the flasher, and the flasher will go off with a bell, and then you'll know to stop and not cross. Nothing will lock, no arm will come down, but it is, the warning to the user that there is a train coming and you need to wait for it to come. And there will be signage that indicates that.
Okay, so when there's no train, you still have to open the gate? You still have to
Yes.
press a button?
Yes, no, you don't push a button. It's much like all of our other trail gates, like our cattle gates. You'll pull the gate towards you and walk through it.
And then it comes back automatically?
Yeah, exactly. It'll automatically shut and swing behind you.
And there's a gate on both sides of the tracks?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. So the figure with amounts that you showed us does not include the cost of building the trail?
There was a number in there for building the trail. We had about, yes, 300,000, 320,000 in there to construct the trail and the features part of the trail.
Okay, that's great. Then I have a name suggestion that I'll toss in now.
Why not?
You can
Okay.
put that in the minutes. And that is that, the spider parcel that was at the top next to Garand that we have was a Harlan Gelderman deed. And Gelderman, I'm pretty sure has two ends at the end. But the person who was involved in that was descended from a 19th century family called Harlan. And they were important family in Mission San Jose, which is not far from here. They actually owned the store at the Mission for a while and were very active with Gold Rush. And they also were early settlers in the San Ramon Valley. And Harlan Gelderman was a descendant of that family. And so I would just like to, again, suggest that if we
Yep.
are naming any kind of trail up at, that associates with that spider parcel at all, that we think about using the name Harlan, because that is a very significant historical name in Northern California associated with the Gold Rush, Harlan Gelderman, of course, and then the Mission.
Okay.
And I will say there are Harlans everywhere. I can't tell you how many Harlans I've met. So just, if you would just pop that in, I have mentioned it before.
Yep.
And Harlan Gelderman himself was a very prominent real estate person and developer in the East Bay, and died quite young, or he might have been governor. So he was quite an extraordinary man, and I don't know whether he really lost that piece in a poker game or not. But the name Harlan, I would like to see considered for some part of the trail there.
Okay. I will, we're working with folks in planning on the trails in that particular parcel. So I will
Yeah,
bring that
so
up with
it's-
them, and we'll.
It's about the time they're looking at it.
Mhm.
So again, thank you very much. We did have part of our land session
Oh, that's where my
was
memory is.
a briefer report on this, and it is a very important piece. So you said that this will make a continuous a bay trail from this location to what location? Kennedy Grove?
Yes, Kennedy Grove, all the way up to
Okay.
Kennedy Grove. So that's actually over 50 miles.
Okay, it's very impressive, and I look forward to having this completed.
Yeah, me too.
Because I'm
me
sure
too.
you
And
do, Suzanne.
very much so, yes. And
Yeah.
you'll also recall that this is also a section of the Juan Bautista de Anza National Historic Trail as well.
Yeah, so it has the Anza Trail as well. And then I guess, I know Director Waspy has said, well, we're not interested in that park. The Fremont Park, that's Viejo Mills, but I think we ought to take a look at it, because there is an area, well, it has a lot of challenges, I realize, but sometimes it's important for us to think about what, a face for the district. And this would be a face for the district at the start of the Niles Canyon and the trail. And so maybe operationally it's just a terrible nightmare, but for a public face, you have to track yourself up there to find Garand, and you have to noodle around to find the Alameda Creek Trail, and you have to go up all kinds of weird places to find Vargas, and here is something that's right there on the corner of Niles and Mission, and I'd like us to just look at it maybe in a different way than if we're Jim just doing operations. Because I know these operations guys, they don't want this park, but I think we ought to try and look at it more broadly. Sorry, Jim.
You're talking about the city park? There?
Yeah, Vallejo Mills. That's the park.
As something we ought to oversee or take part in?
Fremont is interested in us taking it
Oh,
over, and it has
didn't know
all
that.
kinds of homeless and other kinds of issues.
Ah,
And so generally we talk about no, or what does Fremont have to offer us in exchange?
oh, all sorts of things come to my mind that I won't go into. It's not on the agenda.
Director Lane, I would just say comments noted. Thank you. And certainly is an issue that we are looking at. So thanks for your comments.
All right, I have no questions and would just be repeating comments. Thank you for the very comprehensive presentation, Suzanne. We appreciate it. We do have a public member.
Thank you. Since we're talking about a history of 100 years ago, I too am something of a historian. I'd like to take you back to May 2019. That's almost exactly 3 years ago, when the Park District put out a report that this trail was expected to be completed in 2021. So 2024 minus 2020. So we got a 3-year delay on this, and which is probably more than the length of the coronavirus and more than anybody could imagine. So what is that? That's probably doubled. So it's taking twice as long as expected. As far as this trail, the Niles Canyon, last month there was a meeting. The Alameda County Planning Department or whoever is very active in planning that Niles Canyon Trail. There was 50 or 100 people gathered and walking around downtown Sunol to talk about the upcoming EIR. Might be out right now for that Niles Canyon Trail. So that's very, very important. And there's, of course, a big controversy over whether or not to run the trail through downtown Sunol, because they don't view themselves as a crossroads. They view themselves as an isolated dead end that has been a dead end for 100 years or 150 years. When my reading of history, remember I just said I was a historian, is that Sunol was built as a crossroads. And then when you look at this map that we just saw about trails, and we're talking about trails, and there's this vague allusion towards having a Bay Area Ridge Trail that goes southwards through Vargas Plateau Regional Park and then on southwards towards wherever. Well, when you get into Vargas Plateau Regional Park, and the Park District has actually tried to block off all the exits to the north and to the west. At Pickering Avenue, there was recently a prison barricade constructed. Of course, that got taken down, but there was a prison barricade built at Pickering. About a half mile northwest of that, north of that, at the northwest corner, there's a gate, but that gate is marked as illegal to cross. At Deer Road, which is near Stanhammer, there's a gate, and there's another existing trail, and that's blocked off. And at the end of Stanhammer Lane, the east end, at the uphill end, you can actually see it on the picture behind the speaker's slide. When you look at the speaker had
Kelly, you have 30 seconds remaining.
Yeah, this picture had a picture of the rural neighborhood with a water tower there and a little road going up into the hills. That road is a trail. So there are actually 2 trails and 1 gate leaving Vargas Plateau, all of them blocked off. So let's try to figure out how to connect with Vargas Plateau. There's plenty of opportunity, but as always, the real obstacles are political. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. So that concludes this agenda item?
That's correct.
That's correct. The next agenda item is public comments, I suppose, for items not on the agenda. So once again, we'll look around. I see a hand. Go ahead, Kelly.
Kelly, if you'd like to speak, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, yeah. City of Pleasanton on May 17th or May 25th at a city council meeting. And there was a development out there in like the Pleasanton in Castlewood somewhere. Actually, it's right next to that Adobe Park, the new trail entrance at Pleasanton Ridge. And these developers building a lot of houses there. There's a lot of houses half built. And they were ordered 15 years ago. The city ordered them to build a trail, a half mile or mile of walking trail loop. All the neighbors there turned out in force and spoke at length about how horrible all the existing trails are. What an awful suffering that they're having because of all the terrible parking congestion and existing trails and visitors and in their again rural, isolated and remote neighborhood that's being overrun by park visitors. So the city council voted unanimously to oppose a new trail, which was going to be built for free, by the way, by the developer. So they didn't want a free trail. At the same time, in the same meeting, an hour earlier, several people, local residents, showed up and were pointing at their regional arroyo trails. There's 90 miles of them, and about 10 miles of them are inside Pleasanton. And they pointed at these regional arroyo trails and complained about how the city and how the water district, the flood control district, are not maintaining those trails. There's potholes, there's collapses, there's landslides. They can't even ride their bikes safely. The little kiddies are in danger. One guy was bloodied falling off his bicycle, a middle-aged gentleman. And they're upset that their trails are not being maintained properly. So you have two groups of people in the same town, in Pleasanton. By the way, I'm driving through Pleasanton right this very moment, so I can see Pleasanton very well, right out the car windshield. Pleasanton has two groups of people. One group hates the trails, and the other group sees trails as their right, and that's why they moved to Pleasanton, and they want trails to be properly maintained. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Committee comments. Next item. Directors, any?
No, I think, thank you for all the presentations, and looking forward to I appreciate the planning that's going forward and for the committee, and looking forward to seeing you all again.
Director?
Well, I was going to talk about Crown Beach parking, but since I already did that, I don't really have more to say, and thank you for the meeting.
Yes, thank you all for the presentations and the work that we got in advance. To close out then, Deputy General Manager, anything?
Just a quick reminder, an announcement tomorrow, we're renaming Craft Cup Visitor Center. And I hope to see all of you there. It's meant to be a very memorable event in recognition of the work and service of Director Seiden, former Director Seiden.
We'll be there.
Yes, 2 o'clock.
Okay. Anything, folks? Anything to add? All right, then we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.